On a turbulent flight to Miami, a billionaire tech mogul watched helplessly as his twins' meltdown spiraled so out of control that the captain threatened an emergency landing. Every first-class passenger glared in disgust at the chaos his $4.2 billion fortune couldn't solve. Then something extraordinary happened. A black elementary school teacher from the cheap seats quietly approached with nothing but a handmade children's book and transformed the entire cabin in minutes. Welcome back to Eva's Stories. I have missed you all so much. Thank you for sticking around with me. I truly appreciate your love and support. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video and comment where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories like this. And trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, allow me to take you back to how this story began that morning, with screaming kids and desperate prayers at 21,000 feet. Connor Hayes stood at the boarding gate clutching two small backpacks, his navy blue sweater already wrinkled from wrestling with his twins. Oliver bounced on his toes beside him, pointing at every airplane through the massive windows, while Chloe tugged at her yellow dress and whined about wanting McDonald's. "Daddy, can we sit with the pilot?" Oliver asked for the 15th time, his green eyes wide with 4-year-old wonder. "No, buddy. We talked about this." Connor's voice carried the exhaustion of a man who'd been single-parenting for 8 months. "We sit in our seats and use inside voices." Chloe's bottom lip trembled. "I want mommy." The words hit Connor like a punch to the chest. He knelt down, his designer jeans scraping against the airport carpet. "I know, princess. Mommy's watching us from heaven, remember? She wants us to be brave on our big adventure to Miami." Behind him, a businessman in a gray suit muttered to his colleague, "Rich people can't even control their own kids. This flight's going to be hell." Connor's jaw tightened. He'd heard variations of that comment everywhere they went. Restaurants, hotels, the grocery store. People assumed his money should somehow make parenting easier, as if you could purchase good behavior along with first-class tickets. Flight 847 to Miami, now boarding first-class passengers, the gate agent announced. Connor gathered their carry-on bags, his laptop case, and the twins' emergency snack supply. The weight of curious stares followed them down the jet bridge. Oliver skipped ahead while Chloe dragged her stuffed elephant behind her. Meanwhile, Evelyn Washington settled into her window seat, smoothing her emerald green cardigan and adjusting the small silver cross at her throat. At 52, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who'd spent 30 years teaching kindergarten in Denver's inner-city schools. Her retirement had come earlier than planned, but her late husband Jerome's life insurance meant she could finally take that trip to visit her sister in Miami. The middle-aged woman in the aisle seat glanced at her with barely concealed annoyance. "Excuse me, I think you're in my seat." Evelyn checked her boarding pass. 23A, window seat. "That's what I have." The woman's lips pursed. "Well, I specifically requested a window seat when I booked. There must be some mistake." "Ma'am, I can help sort this out," offered a young flight attendant named Jennifer Torres, approaching with a warm smile. After checking both boarding passes, Jennifer confirmed Evelyn's seat assignment. The other woman huffed and dropped into the middle seat with exaggerated frustration, immediately claiming both armrests. Evelyn opened her worn leather purse and pulled out a children's book with a faded cover showing 2 rabbits sharing a carrot. The Kindness Garden had been her classroom favorite for 28 years. She'd read it to thousands of children, watching their faces light up at the story of friendship overcoming differences. The book reminded her of Jerome, who'd surprised her with it during her first year teaching. "Every child needs to hear about kindness," he'd said, "especially the ones who haven't seen much of it." She tucked the book away as the plane filled with passengers. Through her window, she watched ground crews loading luggage while families hugged goodbye at the gate. Back in first class, Connor strapped Oliver and Chloe into their seats, 2A and 2B, while he took 2C on the aisle. The twins immediately began their familiar routine of testing every button, exploring every pocket, and asking rapid-fire questions about everything they could see. "What's that beeping?" Chloe pointed at the cabin lights. "Why is that man sleeping already?" Oliver stared at the passenger across the aisle. "Can we order pizza on the airplane? Where do airplanes go potty?" Connor answered each question patiently while other first-class passengers shot increasingly irritated glances their way. Patricia Mills, a woman in her 40s wearing a cream-colored blazer, whispered loudly to her husband, "Some people shouldn't fly first class if they can't control their children." Robert Kane, a business consultant returning from a conference, looked up from his phone with obvious annoyance. "This is exactly why I pay extra for first class. To avoid this kind of chaos." The flight attendant, Jennifer, approached with a bright smile. "Can I get you folks anything before takeoff? Maybe some coloring books for the little ones." "That would be wonderful," Connor said gratefully. "And if you have any snacks that might keep them occupied." "Of course. I'll be right back." As the plane pushed back from the gate, Connor felt his stomach tighten with familiar dread. Every flight had become an ordeal since Melissa's death. The twins didn't understand why Mommy wasn't coming back, and their confusion manifested as hyperactivity and emotional outbursts. At home, Connor could manage with their nanny and familiar routines. But trapped in an airplane with nowhere to run, he felt helpless. For the first 30 minutes after takeoff, everything went smoothly. Oliver colored dinosaurs while Chloe arranged her crackers into patterns on her tray table. Connor dared to relax, even pulling out his phone to check emails from his tech company. Then the turbulence hit. The plane lurched suddenly, sending Chloe's crackers flying. Her face crumpled as she watched her careful arrangements scatter across the floor. "My crackers!" she wailed, her voice rising to a pitch that made nearby passengers wince. Oliver, startled by the bumpy motion, dropped his crayons and grabbed Connor's arm. "Daddy, is the airplane braking?" "No, buddy. It's just some bumpy air. Like driving over a pothole." Connor tried to keep his voice calm, but his own anxiety was climbing. Turbulence always made the twins worse. The seatbelt sign chimed on, and the captain's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some rough air. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Chloe's crying intensified. The sound seemed to echo off the cabin walls, magnified in the confined space. Oliver joined in, not from fear but from the infectious panic that twins often shared. "I want to get down." Chloe unbuckled her seatbelt and tried to climb over Connor to reach the aisle. "Sweetie, you need to stay in your seat. It's not safe to walk around right now." "I don't want to stay. I want Mommy. I want to go home." Her screams grew louder. Other passengers turned to stare, their expressions ranging from sympathy to outright hostility. Connor's face burned with embarrassment as he tried to wrestle Chloe back into her seat. Oliver, seeing his sister's distress, began his own meltdown. "I want juice. I want my toys. Why can't we go see the pilot?" Both twins were crying now, their voices creating a symphony of chaos that filled the first-class cabin. Connor's hands shook as he tried to comfort them both simultaneously. "Sir," Patricia Mills called from across the aisle, "some of us are trying to work. Can you please control your children?" The word stung because Connor had been trying to control them. Every technique he'd learned from parenting books, every strategy recommended by child psychologists, every trick their former nanny had taught him. Nothing worked when the twins fed off each other's energy like this. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely audible over their crying. "They're just scared." "Well, they're scaring the rest of us," Robert Kane added, not looking up from his laptop. "Maybe next time consider a babysitter." Connor's jaw clenched. If only it were that simple. If only Melissa were still here to help. If only the twins didn't carry the weight of grief they couldn't understand. The situation escalates, the turbulence worsened, causing the plane to drop suddenly. Several passengers gasped, and the twins' crying reached new heights. Chloe managed to escape her seatbelt again and scrambled toward the aisle. "No, Chloe, come back here." Connor lunged after her, accidentally bumping Robert Kane's laptop. "Watch it!" Kane snapped, steadying his computer. Oliver, now alone in his seat, began hyperventilating between sobs. His face turned red, and Connor realized he was having one of his panic attacks. "Hey, buddy, breathe with Daddy." Connor demonstrated slow breathing while trying to coax Chloe back to her seat. "In through your nose, out through your mouth." But Oliver couldn't hear him over his own hysteria. Other passengers were openly complaining now. This is ridiculous. Someone needs to do something. I paid good money for a peaceful flight. Jennifer approached cautiously, her professional smile strained. Mr. Hayes, is there anything I can do to help? I don't know, Connor admitted, his voice cracking with desperation. They're usually better than this. The turbulence just sets them off. Chloe had crawled under the seat in front of her and refused to come out. Oliver's breathing had become shallow and rapid. Connor felt completely overwhelmed, caught between two children in crisis with an audience of strangers judging his every move. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom again, and this time his tone carried a note of authority that made every passenger pay attention. Flight attendants, please take your seats immediately. We're going to try climbing to a higher altitude to get above this weather. Connor's heart pounded as he realized how serious the situation had become. The twins were still in full meltdown mode, other passengers were openly hostile, and now the flight itself seemed to be in some kind of distress. He looked around desperately, hoping for a miracle, some sign of what to do next. That's when he noticed her for the first time, a woman with kind eyes and graying hair, watching from the coach section with an expression he couldn't quite read. Evelyn Washington had been observing the crisis unfold with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent 3 decades managing classroom emergencies. She'd seen this exact scenario play out countless times. Overwhelmed parent, overstimulated children, and a crowd of adults who'd forgotten what it felt like to be small and scared. She unbuckled her seatbelt. The turbulence hit like a freight train. Connor's coffee cup flew from his tray table, splashing hot liquid across his lap as the Boeing 737 dropped violently through an air pocket. Around him, passengers gasped and grabbed their armrests. The overhead bins rattled ominously. But nothing compared to what happened to his twins. Oliver's coloring book sailed through the air, pages fluttering like confetti. His green eyes went wide with terror as he pressed himself against his seat back, small fingers clawing at the leather armrests. "Daddy!" he screamed, his voice cutting through the cabin noise like a knife. "The airplane is crashing." Chloe's reaction was worse. The 4-year-old had been carefully arranging her animal crackers when the plane lurched. She watched her precious snacks scatter across the floor, and something inside her shattered. No, no, no," she shrieked, her face turning scarlet. "My cookies! My beautiful cookies!" She unbuckled herself and dove toward the floor, crawling on her hands and knees to collect the broken crackers. Her yellow dress rode up as she scrambled under seats, oblivious to the shocked stares of first-class passengers. "Chloe, get back in your seat right now!" Connor lunged after her, his heart hammering against his ribs. The plane bounced again, nearly sending him sprawling into the aisle. Oliver's panic attack kicked into full gear. His breathing became rapid and shallow, little chest heaving as he hyperventilated. "I can't breathe! Daddy, I can't breathe! Where's Mommy? I want Mommy!" The sound of his son's desperate gasps while his daughter screamed under a stranger's seat sent Connor's own anxiety spiraling. His hands shook as he tried to reach both children simultaneously. "Oliver, buddy, look at me. Breathe with Daddy." Connor demonstrated slow, deep breaths while stretching toward Chloe. "In through your nose, out through your mouth." But Oliver couldn't hear him over his own hysteria and his sister's wails. His little face had gone pale, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cabin's cool temperature. Chloe emerged from under row 1 with a handful of crumbled crackers, tears streaming down her cheeks. "They're all broken. Everything is broken." She hurled the cracker pieces at the floor in rage, then threw herself down and began pounding the carpet with her tiny fists. Her screams reached a pitch that made several passengers cover their ears. "This is absolutely unacceptable," Patricia Mills announced loudly, her voice dripping with disgust. She stood up despite the turbulence warning, pointing an accusatory finger at Connor. "Some of us paid premium prices for a civilized flight experience." Robert Kane looked up from his laptop with barely contained fury. "I have a crucial presentation in Miami. I cannot concentrate with this circus going on." "Sir, please return to your seat," Flight Attendant Jennifer Torres called to Kane, but her attention was clearly divided between safety protocols and the escalating child crisis. Connor felt every eye in first class boring into him as he dropped to his knees on the carpet next to Chloe. The plane bounced again, and he had to brace himself against a seat to avoid falling on his daughter. "Princess, I know you're upset about your crackers. But we need to get back in our seats where it's safe." "I don't want to be safe," Chloe screamed, kicking her legs as Connor tried to scoop her up. "I want my crackers. I want Mommy. I want to go home." Her small fists connected with Connor's chest as he lifted her, and in her fury, she knocked his glasses askew. He could barely see as he stumbled back toward their row, his vision blurred and his daughter writhing in his arms like an angry cat. Oliver's breathing had become so labored that other passengers began to look genuinely concerned rather than just annoyed. The little boy was making high-pitched wheezing sounds between sobs. "Is he having an asthma attack?" asked Dr. Anthony Reed, a passenger from row 3 who had medical training. "No, it's anxiety," Connor panted, finally managing to deposit Chloe in her seat. She immediately tried to escape again, but he held her shoulders gently but firmly. "Oliver suffers from panic attacks. They started after his mother died." The mention of death created a moment of uncomfortable silence in the cabin. Several passengers shifted awkwardly, their irritation momentarily tempered by sympathy. But Chloe's response to hearing about her mother was volcanic. "Mommy is not dead," she screamed at the top of her lungs. "She's coming back. She promised she'd come back." Her voice cracked with such raw grief that even Patricia Mills looked uncomfortable. Chloe began hitting Connor's hands as he tried to buckle her seatbelt. "She's at the hospital getting better. You lied to me. Liar. Liar." Connor's own eyes filled with tears. This was the conversation they'd had dozens of times with the child therapist. Chloe refused to accept that her mother was gone forever, clinging to the hope that Melissa was simply away getting treatment for her cancer. "Sweetheart, we talked about this with Dr. Palmer," Connor said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "Mommy's body couldn't fight the sickness anymore. But she loves you so much, and she's watching over us." "No!" Chloe's scream was primal, filled with a kind of pain that shouldn't exist in a 4-year-old's world. "I want her now. Bring her back." Oliver, hearing his sister's anguish, became even more agitated. His breathing turned into desperate gasps. "Daddy, I think I'm dying too. Am I going to die like Mommy?" The question hit Connor like a physical blow. He looked around desperately, needing help but seeing only judgment in the faces surrounding them. His chest felt tight, his own breathing becoming shallow as the weight of single parenthood crashed over him once again. "Nobody is dying," he said, his voice cracking. "We're all going to be okay. I promise." But even as he said the words, Connor wasn't sure he believed them. The twins fed off each other's energy, escalating each other's panic until they reached a crescendo that seemed impossible to stop. At home, he could separate them, give them space to calm down individually. On this airplane, trapped in seats that felt more like prison cells, he was helpless. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Folks, I'm going to need everyone to remain seated with seatbelts fastened. We're experiencing some significant weather, and I'm requesting priority clearance to climb to 35,000 feet to get above this turbulence." Priority clearance. That sounded serious. Connor's stomach dropped as he realized the flight itself might be in genuine distress, and his children's meltdown was creating additional chaos during a potentially dangerous situation. Chloe had managed to unbuckle herself again and was now standing on her seat, her face red and puffy from crying. "I want off this airplane. Let me off. Let me off." She began climbing over the seat back toward row 1, her yellow dress catching on the headrest. Oliver saw his sister escaping and tried to follow, unbuckling his own belt with shaking fingers. "No, both of you need to stay put." Connor's voice carried a note of genuine panic now. He grabbed Oliver with one hand while reaching for Chloe with the other, but she was already halfway over the seat. "This has gone far enough." Robert Kane stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger. "I'm going to speak to the captain about an emergency landing. This is creating a safety hazard for everyone on board." "Sir, please sit down." Jennifer Torres approached with 2 other flight attendants. "We're working on the situation." "Working on it how?" Kane demanded. These children are completely out of control, and their father is clearly incompetent. We need to land this plane before someone gets hurt. Connor felt his face burn with shame and rage. Incompetent. The word echoed in his head, joining the chorus of doubts that had plagued him since Melissa's death. Was he incompetent? Had his billions meant nothing when it came to the most important job in the world? Chloe had succeeded in climbing into row 1, where she collapsed in an elderly man's lap, sobbing hysterically. The passenger, clearly uncomfortable, tried to gently return her to Connor while she clung to his shirt. "Please, little girl, you need to go back to your daddy," the man said kindly but firmly. Oliver, seeing his sister's distress, began screaming for her. "Chloe, come back. Don't leave me." The sound of his son's terror while his daughter sobbed in a stranger's arms broke something inside Connor. He felt tears streaming down his own face as he realized he was failing as a father in front of a plane full of witnesses. That's when he noticed her. Through the blur of his tears and the chaos surrounding his family, Connor saw a woman rising from her seat in coach. She was African American, probably in her 50s, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back neatly. Something about her presence cut through the noise and panic like a calm voice in a storm. Evelyn Washington had been watching the crisis unfold with growing concern. She'd seen this exact scenario countless times in her kindergarten classroom. Overwhelmed parent, overstimulated children, and a crowd of adults who'd forgotten what it felt like to be small and scared. But more than that, she recognized the specific type of grief-fueled meltdown these twins were having. She'd seen it in students who'd lost parents, grandparents, beloved pets. The anger and denial that masked unbearable sadness. As Evelyn stood and began walking toward first class, several coach passengers called out to her. "Ma'am, the seatbelt sign is on," worried Helen Baker, the elderly woman beside her. "This isn't your problem," muttered another passenger. "Let the rich guy deal with his own kids." But Evelyn had spent 30 years answering the call when children needed help, regardless of safety protocols or social boundaries. She moved through the turbulent cabin with the steady purpose of someone who knew exactly what needed to be done. The flight attendants were too busy managing the safety crisis to notice one passenger moving forward. Evelyn reached the first-class cabin just as Chloe's sobs reached a heartbreaking crescendo and Oliver's breathing became dangerously rapid. She stood there for a moment, taking in the scene, a broken father trying to comfort two grief-stricken children while hostile passengers demanded action and flight crews struggled to maintain order during turbulence. Then Evelyn Washington did something that would change 3 lives forever. She reached into her worn leather purse and pulled out The Kindness Garden, the faded children's book that had been her classroom companion for 28 years. "Excuse me, ma'am. You need to return to your seat immediately." Flight attendant Jennifer Torres intercepted Evelyn at the boundary between coach and first class, her professional smile strained by the ongoing crisis. Behind her, Chloe's wails continued to pierce the cabin air while Oliver gasped for breath in his father's arms. "The seatbelt sign is illuminated, and we're experiencing severe turbulence," Jennifer continued, placing a gentle but firm hand on Evelyn's arm. "It's not safe for passengers to be walking around." Evelyn looked past the young flight attendant toward the chaos in row 2. Connor Hayes sat hunched over his hyperventilating son, his own face pale with exhaustion and defeat. Chloe had somehow climbed into the lap of an elderly passenger in row 1, her small body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her 4-year-old soul should contain. "That little boy is having a panic attack," Evelyn said quietly, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who'd managed countless classroom emergencies. "And that little girl is processing grief in the only way she knows how. They need help." "We have the situation under control," Jennifer replied, though her eyes betrayed her uncertainty. "The father is handling it." Evelyn glanced at Connor, who was clearly drowning. His expensive navy sweater was wrinkled and stained with spilled coffee. His designer glasses sat crooked on his nose. Most tellingly, his hands trembled as he tried to demonstrate breathing exercises for Oliver while simultaneously reaching for Chloe. "That man is overwhelmed and alone," Evelyn observed. "Sometimes it takes a village." "Ma'am, I understand your concern, but airline policy is very clear about passengers remaining in their assigned areas during turbulence. I need you to return to seat 23A immediately." The plane lurched again, and Evelyn gripped the nearest seat back to steady herself. Through the first-class cabin, she could hear the growing murmur of passenger complaints mixing with the twins' distress. "This is absolutely ridiculous," Patricia Mills was saying loudly to her husband. "We paid for first class to avoid exactly this kind of disruption. Where's the captain? Someone needs to take control of this situation." Robert Kane had his phone out, apparently trying to record the chaos. "I'm documenting this entire incident. This is negligent supervision at best. These children are creating a safety hazard during a weather emergency." Dr. Anthony Reed, the medical professional from row 3, had moved closer to observe Oliver's breathing. "This child needs immediate intervention. His panic attack is escalating beyond what his father can manage alone." "See," Evelyn said to Jennifer. "Even that doctor thinks they need help. I taught kindergarten for 30 years. I know how to calm frightened children." Jennifer's radio crackled to life. The captain's voice came through clearly. "All flight attendants to stations immediately. We're going to attempt to climb through this weather system. Estimated time to clear conditions is 15 minutes. 15 more minutes of this chaos." Evelyn could see the exhaustion and desperation building in Connor's eyes. The man was at his breaking point, and his children were spiraling further out of control by the minute. "I'm sorry," Jennifer said firmly, "but I have my orders. Please return to your seat now, or I'll have to ask security to escort you when we land." The threat hung in the air between them. Evelyn had faced this type of institutional resistance before, usually when advocating for students who didn't fit the system's expectations. She'd learned that sometimes doing the right thing meant accepting consequences. "I understand," she said quietly, then added with gentle persistence, "but those children are in crisis. And that father needs support." Jennifer's expression softened slightly, but her position remained firm. "I know you want to help, but it's just not possible right now. Please." Reluctantly, Evelyn began walking back toward Coach. But as she passed row 2, Oliver's breathing became so labored that Dr. Reed stood up abruptly. "This child is approaching hyperventilation syncope," he announced. "He could pass out if his breathing doesn't regulate soon." Connor looked up with wild, frightened eyes. "What does that mean? Is he going to be okay?" "He needs to slow his breathing immediately. Do you have a paper bag?" "I don't know, Connor fumbled through their carry-on bags with shaking hands. "Chloe, sweetheart, please come back to Daddy. Your brother needs you." But Chloe was beyond reason, clinging to the confused elderly passenger and sobbing, "I want my mommy. Bring back my mommy." The sound of his daughter's grief while his son struggled to breathe pushed Connor past his limit. Tears streamed down his face as he realized he couldn't help both children simultaneously. "I don't know what to do," he whispered to Dr. Reed. "I'm failing them. I'm failing my wife. I can't do this alone." It was the broken admission of a man who'd spent months pretending he had everything under control. The billionaire tech mogul who commanded boardrooms and managed billion-dollar deals was completely helpless in the face of his children's pain. From her position in the aisle, Evelyn heard every word. The father's quiet desperation cut through her more deeply than the children's loud distress. She'd seen this before in single parents who'd lost spouses, the overwhelming weight of suddenly carrying all the emotional labor alone. Patricia Mills apparently heard it too, but her response was anything but sympathetic. "Well, maybe you should have thought of that before bringing disturbed children on a public flight. Some of us have important business in Miami." The casual cruelty of calling grieving 4-year-olds disturbed made several passengers gasp. Even Robert Kane looked uncomfortable with her choice of words. "That's completely inappropriate," Dr. Reed said sharply to Patricia. "These children have clearly suffered a significant loss. They're not disturbed. They're traumatized. Whatever they are, they don't belong in first class," Patricia shot back. "I'm going to demand a full refund from the airline. This is unacceptable." Her husband tugged at her sleeve. "Patricia, please. The man just said his wife died. That's his problem, not ours. We didn't pay premium prices to be subjected to this circus." Connor flinched as if he'd been slapped. The judgment in Patricia's voice echoed every cruel comment he'd heard since becoming a widower. People expected him to have moved on by now, to have his grief neatly packaged and his children's trauma resolved. They didn't understand that loss wasn't something you got over, but something you learned to carry. Oliver's breathing became even more rapid, his small chest heaving with desperate gasps. Chloe's sobs had taken on a hoarse quality that suggested she'd been crying for too long. "Please," Connor said to Jennifer, who had returned to check on the situation. "Isn't there anything you can do? Maybe move us to the back of the plane where we won't disturb anyone." "Sir, we can't change seating assignments during flight, especially in these weather conditions. And the seatbelt sign must remain on until we clear this turbulence." Connor nodded, defeated. He understood the rules, even if they felt like prison bars at the moment. He was trapped in this confined space with 2 children in crisis and a cabin full of strangers who saw them as nothing more than an inconvenience. That's when Evelyn made her decision. She stepped forward again, this time addressing Connor directly instead of seeking permission from the flight crew. "Excuse me," she said softly. "My name is Evelyn Washington. I taught kindergarten for 30 years, and I think I might be able to help." Connor looked up through his tears, seeing her clearly for the first time. There was something in her eyes that he hadn't seen from anyone else on the plane. Genuine compassion without judgment. "I don't want to overstep," Evelyn continued, "but I have some experience with children who are processing grief. Sometimes a fresh voice can help break through the panic." Jennifer Torres stepped forward immediately. "Ma'am, I already told you." "It's okay," Connor interrupted, his voice hoarse from emotional exhaustion. "Please. If you think you can help them, I'm willing to try anything." The admission carried the weight of complete surrender. This man who was accustomed to being in control, who probably hadn't asked for help from strangers in decades, was ready to accept assistance from anyone who offered it. Patricia Mills made a disgusted sound. "Oh, wonderful. Now we're going to have unauthorized passengers treating children like some kind of airborne daycare center. This gets better and better." Her comment sparked something in Connor that surprised everyone, including himself. He turned toward her with sudden fire in his eyes. "Those unauthorized passengers you're talking about? Her name is Mrs. Washington, and she just offered to help my grieving children when no one else would. So maybe show a little respect." It was the first time since boarding that Connor had defended himself or his family. The quiet strength in his voice made several passengers sit up and take notice. But Patricia wasn't finished. "Respect? For what? I don't know this woman from anyone. She could be mentally unstable for all we know. I'm not comfortable with random strangers approaching children in distress." The racist undertone in her words wasn't lost on anyone within earshot. Several passengers looked uncomfortable, and Dr. Reed actually stood up. "That's enough," he said firmly to Patricia. "You're completely out of line." Robert Kane, who had been mostly focused on his complaints about the disruption, also looked troubled by Patricia's implications. "She seems like a perfectly reasonable person trying to help." But the damage was done. The tension in the first-class cabin had shifted from annoyance at the children's behavior to something much uglier. Evelyn felt the familiar sting of being judged not for her qualifications or intentions, but for her race. She'd experienced this countless times throughout her teaching career. The parents who questioned her credentials, the administrators who doubted her methods, the colleagues who assumed she was less qualified despite her advanced degrees and decades of experience. "Mrs. Washington," Connor said, and there was something protective in his voice that surprised them both. "Please don't let her ignorance stop you from helping my children. They need you right now." The simple acknowledgement that she was needed, combined with his use of her proper title, nearly brought tears to Evelyn's eyes. When was the last time someone had spoken to her with such respect and gratitude? Oliver's breathing had become so labored that he was making small whimpering sounds between gasps. Chloe had cried herself into hiccuping sobs, but still refused to return to her seat. The turbulence showed no signs of letting up. The captain's voice remained conspicuously absent from the intercom, and the crisis was escalating beyond anyone's ability to control it through normal channels. Evelyn looked at Connor's tear-streaked face, then at Oliver's desperate struggle for air, then at little Chloe clinging to a stranger because she had nowhere else to put her overwhelming grief. She took another step forward, the kindness garden still clutched in her hand. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "rules have to bend when children are breaking." Captain Frank Morrison's voice crackled through the intercom with an authority that made every passenger freeze mid-conversation. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've encountered a more severe weather system than initially forecasted. Air traffic control has cleared us to divert our flight path south toward Arkansas to avoid the worst of these storms. This will add approximately 45 minutes to our flight time to Miami. I need everyone to remain seated with seatbelts fastened until further notice. Flight attendants, secure the cabin immediately. 45 extra minutes." The words hit Connor like a physical blow. He looked at Oliver, whose breathing had become so shallow that his lips were starting to turn pale, then at Chloe, who was now lying across the elderly passenger's lap in complete exhaustion from crying. "We're going to be okay," he whispered to his children, though he wasn't sure who he was trying to convince. "Everything's going to be fine." But nothing felt fine. The turbulence had worsened, the cabin lights flickered intermittently, and his twins were trapped in a spiral of grief and panic that showed no signs of stopping. Jennifer Torres hurried past, speaking urgently into her radio. "Captain, we have a situation in first class. 2 young children in severe distress, and their father is requesting assistance." The captain's response was barely audible over the static, but Connor caught enough words to understand. Medical emergency protocols, possible priority landing, passenger safety assessment. Did he just say emergency landing? Robert Kane asked nervously, his earlier irritation replaced by genuine concern. Dr. Reed nodded grimly. "If that child's breathing doesn't regulate soon, we might need to divert to the nearest airport. Panic-induced syncope in a 4-year-old can be serious." The weight of those words settled over the first-class cabin like a heavy blanket. What had started as an inconvenience was now potentially affecting the entire flight's safety. Connor felt the familiar crushing guilt that had plagued him since Melissa's death. His inability to manage his own children was now impacting 147 other passengers. "I'm so sorry," he said to everyone and no one in particular. "This isn't their fault. They lost their mother 8 months ago, and they're still processing the grief. I don't know how to help them anymore." The raw honesty in his admission created an uncomfortable silence. Several passengers who had been vocal in their complaints now looked away, unable to meet his eyes. That's when the plane hit another massive air pocket. The Boeing 737 dropped so suddenly that several passengers screamed. Overhead bins popped open, sending personal items flying through the cabin. The lights went out completely for 3 terrifying seconds before emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in an eerie red glow. Oliver's panic attack reached a crescendo. His breathing became rapid, desperate gasps as he clawed at his father's arms. "Daddy, we're going to die. We're going to die like Mommy." Chloe's response was to go completely limp in the stranger's arms, overwhelmed by sensory overload and exhaustion. But her silence was somehow more alarming than her previous screams. "She's not responding," the elderly passenger said with growing alarm. "I think she might be going into shock." Connor's world narrowed to a single horrifying moment of clarity. He was about to lose both his children to the same grief that had already taken their mother. Not physically, perhaps, but emotionally. They were breaking apart in his arms, and he had no idea how to put them back together. "Please," he said to Jennifer Torres as she rushed past again. "Can Mrs. Washington please try to help? I don't care about the rules anymore. My children need someone who understands how to reach them." Jennifer looked torn between protocol and compassion. Her training said no passengers should be out of their seats during severe turbulence. But her human instincts recognized a family in genuine crisis. "I could lose my job for this," she said quietly. "And I could lose my children," Connor replied. "Please." The plea in his voice was so raw that even Patricia Mills stopped complaining long enough to listen. Dr. Reed nodded his support for the request. "That woman clearly has experience with children," he said to Jennifer. "And medically speaking, these kids need intervention soon." Jennifer made a decision that would later earn her both a formal reprimand and a commendation for compassionate service. "Mrs. Washington, if you think you can help, Please be very careful moving through the cabin. Hold on to seat backs at all times. Evelyn had been watching the crisis unfold with growing urgency. Everything in her teacher's training told her that these children were approaching complete emotional shutdown. Oliver's panic attack was entering dangerous territory, and Chloe's sudden silence suggested she was overwhelmed beyond her ability to cope. She made her way carefully through the turbulent cabin, the kindness garden clutched tightly in one hand while she gripped seat backs with the other. Several coach passengers called out as she passed. "Be careful, honey," said Helen Baker, the elderly woman who'd been sitting beside her. "Go help those babies," encouraged another passenger. "They need you." But not everyone was supportive. As Evelyn reached the first-class boundary, Patricia Mills stood up despite the turbulence warning. "This is completely inappropriate," she announced loudly. "I'm going to report this entire incident to the airline. Random passengers should not be treating children during a flight emergency." "Sit down, Patricia," her husband said wearily. "You're making everything worse. I'm trying to maintain some order in this chaos. We don't know anything about this woman's qualifications or background. She could be making the situation more dangerous." Evelyn paused, feeling the familiar weight of having to prove herself worthy of helping children. How many times had she faced this same skepticism from parents who couldn't see past her race to recognize her expertise? But Connor's voice cut through Patricia's objections with surprising strength. "Mrs. Washington taught kindergarten for 30 years. She has more experience with frightened children than anyone else on this plane. And right now, her qualifications matter a lot less than her willingness to help." The conviction in his words surprised everyone, including Connor himself. When was the last time he'd stood up for someone else? Since Melissa's death, he'd been so focused on survival that he'd forgotten how to fight for what was right. Evelyn met his eyes and saw something that gave her courage. Complete trust from a desperate father who was willing to put his children's well-being in the hands of a stranger. She knelt carefully beside Oliver's seat, speaking in the calm, low voice she'd used with thousands of anxious students over the years. "Hi there, sweetheart. My name is Mrs. Washington. I can see you're having a hard time breathing. Would it be okay if I helped you with that?" Oliver looked at her through his tears, his chest still heaving with rapid breaths. Something in her tone, the way she asked permission rather than demanded compliance, cut through his panic just enough for him to nod. "Good boy. Now, I want you to imagine we're blowing up a big balloon. But this balloon is special because it's going to carry all our worried feelings up to the clouds where they can't hurt us anymore." She demonstrated slow, deep breathing, her voice creating a pocket of calm in the chaotic cabin. "Breathe in slowly through your nose, filling up that balloon. Hold it for just a second. Now blow out through your mouth, sending those worries away." The plane lurched again, but Evelyn maintained her steady presence. "That's it, honey. You're doing so well. Let's blow up another balloon together." Slowly, incredibly, Oliver's breathing began to regulate. The color started returning to his face as he focused on Evelyn's voice instead of his own terror. Connor watched in amazement as this stranger accomplished what he'd been unable to do for months. She was reaching his son. But Chloe remained motionless in the elderly passenger's arms, her eyes staring at nothing. The little girl who'd been screaming minutes before had retreated so far inside herself that she seemed unreachable. Evelyn noticed immediately. After 30 years of teaching, she recognized the signs of a child who'd shut down completely to protect herself from overwhelming emotions. "Hello, beautiful girl," she said softly to Chloe. "I see you there, even when you're feeling invisible. Sometimes when our hearts hurt too much, we go to a quiet place inside where no one can find us. Is that where you are right now?" Chloe's eyes flickered slightly, the first sign of response in several minutes. Evelyn opened the kindness garden to a page showing 2 young rabbits, one hiding behind a tree while the other searched for her. "This little rabbit was hiding too," she said gently. She was so sad about missing her mama that she didn't want anyone to see her tears. "But you know what happened." Despite the turbulence and the chaos surrounding them, Chloe's attention was drawn to the familiar comfort of a story. She didn't speak, but her eyes focused on the colorful illustrations. Her friend didn't give up looking for her. And when he found her behind the tree, do you know what he said? He said, "It's okay to be sad. I'm sad sometimes too. But we don't have to be sad all alone. The simple words seemed to reach something deep inside Chloe. Her small body relaxed slightly in the stranger's arms. Connor watched this miraculous transformation with tears streaming down his face. For months, he'd been failing to connect with his children's grief, unable to bridge the gap between their pain and his own. But this woman, this stranger who'd been treated with such disrespect by other passengers, was somehow reaching them both. "How are you doing this?" he whispered to Evelyn. Sometimes children need to hear their feelings reflected back to them by someone who isn't drowning in the same grief, she replied quietly. "You're an amazing father, but you're grieving too. They can sense that, and it makes them feel like they have to protect you from their pain." The insight hit Connor like lightning. He'd been so focused on being strong for the twins that he'd never allowed them to see his own sadness. In trying to shield them from his grief, he'd inadvertently taught them to hide their own. The mama rabbit in this story, Evelyn continued to Chloe, she had to go on a very long journey to a place where little rabbits couldn't follow. But she left something special behind for her babies. She turned the page to show a picture of two small rabbits finding a garden full of flowers their mother had planted for them. She left them a garden full of love that would bloom forever, even when she couldn't be there to tend it. And every time they saw those flowers, they remembered how much their mama loved them. Chloe's small voice was barely a whisper, but in the relatively quiet cabin, everyone nearby could hear her. "Did my mama leave me a garden?" The question broke Connor's heart and healed it simultaneously. His daughter was finally talking about Melissa directly, acknowledging her death while still holding on to hope. "Oh, sweetheart," Evelyn said with infinite gentleness. "Your mama left you the most beautiful garden of all. She planted her love so deep in your heart that it will grow and bloom your whole life long. And your daddy is helping take care of that garden until you're big enough to tend it yourself." For the first time since boarding the plane, both twins were calm. Oliver's breathing had returned to normal, and Chloe was listening intently to every word of the story. But their forced proximity in the confined space was about to reveal much deeper truths about loss, love, and the courage required to heal. The turbulence was finally beginning to subside, but the emotional storm inside the cabin was just getting started. As Evelyn continued reading to the children, Connor found himself studying her face, wondering about the story behind her remarkable ability to reach his broken family. And in the back of his mind, a quiet voice was asking a question he hadn't allowed himself to consider in 8 months. What would it feel like to not carry this burden alone? "Tell me about the garden again," Chloe whispered, now sitting properly in her seat for the first time since takeoff. Her yellow dress was wrinkled and tear-stained, but her eyes held a spark of curiosity that hadn't been there before. Evelyn had moved to the empty seat across the aisle, having quietly asked the passenger there if they minded switching places. The man, who'd witnessed the entire transformation, gladly moved to accommodate the woman who'd brought peace to the chaotic cabin. "Well," Evelyn said, settling into seat 2D with the kindness garden open on her lap, "this particular garden was very special because it grew different kinds of flowers for different kinds of feelings." Oliver leaned forward in his seat, his breathing now completely normal. "What kind of flowers?" "There were sunshine flowers for happy days, raindrop flowers for when you needed a good cry, and brave flowers for when you had to do something scary." Evelyn's voice carried the practiced rhythm of countless story times. But the most important flowers were the memory blooms. "Memory blooms?" Chloe asked. "Those were flowers that grew every time someone remembered something wonderful about the person they missed. The more beautiful memories they shared, the more gorgeous the garden became." Connor felt his throat tighten as he listened. When was the last time he'd shared a beautiful memory of Melissa with the twins? In his grief and fear of making them sadder, he'd stopped talking about their mother entirely. But maybe that had been exactly the wrong thing to do. "My mama used to make pancakes that looked like animals," Chloe said softly. "She made me a bunny pancake the day before she went to the hospital." The admission was so quiet that Connor barely heard it over the airplane's engines. It was the first positive memory of Melissa that Chloe had shared since the funeral. "That sounds like a perfect memory bloom," Evelyn said with a warm smile. "I bet your mama's garden has the most beautiful bunny flowers because of that memory." Oliver perked up. "She used to read me the same bedtime story every night." The one about the dragon who was afraid of the dark. 2 more gorgeous flowers, Evelyn nodded. Your mama's garden must be absolutely magnificent. Connor watched his children's faces transform as they shared these precious memories. For months, any mention of Melissa had sent them into tears or angry outbursts. But somehow, this stranger had created a safe space for them to remember their mother with joy instead of just pain. How do you know so much about gardens? Connor asked quietly. Evelyn's expression grew thoughtful. I suppose because I needed one myself, once upon a time. The airplane had finally found calmer air, and Captain Morrison's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we've successfully navigated around the storm system. We should have smooth flying from here to Miami. I apologize for the rough ride, and I want to thank everyone for your patience during this challenging flight. The announcement created a collective sigh of relief throughout the cabin, but Connor found himself hoping their conversation wouldn't end just because the emergency had passed. You mentioned you taught kindergarten for 30 years, he said to Evelyn. That must have been rewarding work. It was the most important work I could imagine, she replied, then paused as if deciding whether to share more. I taught at Lincoln Elementary in Denver. Inner city school, lots of children dealing with difficult circumstances. Many of them reminded me of Oliver and Chloe, actually. How so? Children processing loss, death, divorce, parents who had to leave for various reasons. I learned early in my career that grief in children often looks like behavior problems to adults who don't understand what's really happening underneath. Her words hit Connor like a revelation. Every parenting book he'd read, every child psychologist he'd consulted, had focused on managing the twins' behavior. But none of them had really addressed the raw, unprocessed grief that was driving that behavior. Did you have children of your own? Connor asked, then immediately worried he was being too personal. I'm sorry, that's probably none of my business. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the worn edges of the children's book. Jerome and I tried for many years. We went through treatments, procedures, hoped and prayed. But it wasn't meant to be. The sadness in her voice was gentle but unmistakable. Connor felt a pang of recognition, remembering his and Melissa's own struggles with fertility before the twins were born. I'm sorry, he said. That must have been heartbreaking. It was. For a long time, I felt like my body had failed me, like I was somehow incomplete as a woman because I couldn't give my husband children. She smiled softly at Oliver and Chloe, who were listening with the innocent curiosity that children bring to adult conversations. But then I realized that maybe my calling was to mother hundreds of children instead of just a few. Every child who walked into my classroom became mine, in a way. Connor felt something shift in his chest. Here was a woman who'd channeled her own loss into 3 decades of nurturing other people's children. Her childlessness hadn't made her bitter or withdrawn. Instead, it had expanded her capacity for love. Jerome always said I was born to be a teacher, Evelyn continued. He was so proud of the work I did. He'd come to every school play, every science fair, every graduation ceremony. He knew all my students' names, even the ones from years past. He sounds like a wonderful man, Connor said. He was my best friend for 32 years. Evelyn's voice caught slightly. We lost him last March. Sudden heart attack while he was working in our actual garden behind our house. He was planting tomatoes for the spring harvest. The revelation hit Connor like a physical blow. Here was this woman who'd just spent the last hour comforting his grieving children, and she was carrying her own fresh loss. Her husband had died just 8 months ago, almost exactly the same time frame as Melissa's death. Mrs. Washington, I had no idea. I'm so sorry for your loss. Thank you. It's been the hardest year of my life. Jerome and I did everything together. Cooked together, gardened together, planned lessons together. When he died, I felt like half of myself was gone. Oliver, who'd been listening intently, spoke up with the directness that only children possess. Do you cry about your husband like we cry about Mommy? The question hung in the air with startling honesty. Evelyn looked at the little boy with such tenderness that Connor felt his own eyes well up. Yes, sweetheart, I do. Some days I cry so much that I think I might run out of tears. But then I remember something beautiful about Jerome, and it makes me smile instead of cry." "Like a memory bloom?" Chloe asked. "Exactly like a memory bloom. And do you know what I've discovered? The more memory blooms I tend, the less scary the sadness becomes. It's still there, but it's not the only thing growing in my garden anymore." Connor was struck by the profound wisdom in her words. For months, he'd been trying to eliminate the twins' sadness, to fix their grief as if it were a problem to be solved. But Evelyn was suggesting something entirely different. That grief could coexist with joy, that remembering could be healing instead of harmful. "Is that why you helped us today?" he asked. "Because you understand what it's like to lose someone you love?" Evelyn considered the question carefully. "Partly, yes. But also because Jerome always taught me that when you're hurting, the best medicine is often helping someone else who's hurting. It doesn't take your pain away, but it reminds you that you're not alone in carrying it." "But weren't you afraid?" Connor asked. "I mean, the other passengers, the flight attendants, everyone was telling you not to get involved. You could have gotten in serious trouble. Honey, I'm 52 years old, and I've been fighting for children my entire career. I've faced down administrators, difficult parents, budget cuts, and every kind of obstacle you can imagine. A few airplane rules weren't going to stop me from helping 2 babies who needed someone to see their pain." Her matter-of-fact courage made Connor realize how much strength it must have taken for her to approach them. She'd faced hostility, potential consequences, and the judgment of strangers, all to help children she'd never met before. "Why didn't you ever adopt?" Oliver asked with typical 4-year-old bluntness. "If you wanted kids so much?" Evelyn smiled at his directness. "We thought about it many times. But Jerome and I decided that instead of bringing children into our family, we'd bring our family to children. Every student I taught got pieces of my heart, and I got pieces of theirs." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small photo album. "Would you like to see some of my classroom families over the years?" The twins scrambled to look as she opened the album, revealing page after page of school photos, graduation pictures, and handmade cards from students. Connor peered over their shoulders, amazed by the collection of young faces spanning decades. This little girl, Amanda, her mama died when she was 6. She spent most of 1st grade crying under her desk. But by the end of the year, she was helping other students with their math problems. She turned the page. And this boy, Marcus, came to me speaking no English and so angry about being in a new country. By Christmas, he was translating for other new students and writing the most beautiful stories. Connor studied the photos, seeing the transformation in child after child. Happy faces that had clearly overcome significant challenges, all under Evelyn's patient guidance. "They're all grown up now," she continued. "I get wedding invitations, baby announcements, graduation photos. Some of them bring their own children to meet me. That's when I realized that I might not have given birth to children, but I definitely raised some." The depth of her impact was staggering. Hundreds of lives touched, shaped, nurtured through their most vulnerable years. Connor thought about his own success in the tech world, the companies he'd built, the innovations he'd created. But none of it felt as meaningful as what this woman had accomplished in her modest classroom. "Do you miss teaching?" Chloe asked. "Every single day. But I retired early because after Jerome died, I couldn't bear to be around all those children's energy and hope when I felt so empty inside. I thought maybe if I traveled, visited my sister in Miami, kept busy with other things, the pain would be easier to manage." "Is it working?" Connor asked quietly. Evelyn looked at Oliver and Chloe, who were still poring over the photo album, pointing at different pictures and asking questions about each child. "You know what? Sitting here with your babies, seeing them smile again, watching their curiosity come back to life. I think maybe Jerome was right. Maybe the best way to heal a broken heart is to help fix someone else's." Connor felt something profound shifting inside him as he watched Evelyn interact with his children. For the first time since Melissa's death, he wasn't carrying the entire emotional weight of his family alone. Here was someone who understood grief intimately, who had found ways to transform loss into love. But more than that, He was beginning to see Evelyn not just as a helpful stranger, but as a remarkable woman whose strength and wisdom were exactly what his fractured family needed. The airplane continued its steady flight toward Miami, but Connor found himself hoping this conversation never had to end. "Mrs. Washington, can you tell us more about the memory garden?" Oliver asked, settling more comfortably in his seat as the airplane found its smooth cruising altitude. Evelyn noticed that both children had stopped the restless fidgeting that had marked the first half of their flight. Their faces showed genuine peace for the first time since she'd been watching them, and Connor looked more relaxed than she'd seen him all afternoon. Well, in this particular story, the memory garden had paths made of different colored stones. Each color represented a different kind of remembering. She opened the book to a detailed illustration showing a winding garden path. The golden stones were for funny memories that made you laugh out loud. Chloe giggled. "Mommy used to put whipped cream on her nose when she made hot chocolate, just to make us laugh." Connor's breath caught. He remembered that exact habit of Melissa's. She'd started doing it when the twins were toddlers, and it had become a beloved winter tradition. The fact that Chloe remembered it with joy instead of sadness felt like a miracle. "That sounds like the most beautiful golden stone for your path," Evelyn said warmly. "What about blue stones?" "Those were for memories that made you feel safe and loved." Oliver didn't hesitate. "Mommy used to sing to us when we had bad dreams. She knew a song about moonbeams that always made the scary thoughts go away." "Moonbeam dreams," Connor whispered, amazed. "I hadn't thought about that song in months. She made it up herself when you were babies." "Do you remember the words, Daddy?" Chloe asked hopefully. Connor felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Some of them. It went something like, when the moonbeams dance across your bed, they chase away the fears inside your head. And wrap you up in silver light to keep you safe throughout the night," Oliver finished, his small voice carrying the melody Melissa used to hum. The simple act of reciting his wife's lullaby together felt like the most natural thing in the world, yet it was something Connor had been unable to do since her death. Somehow, Evelyn's presence made it feel safe to remember out loud. "That's the most lovely blue stone I've ever heard," Evelyn said softly. "Your mama's garden must be absolutely glowing with all these beautiful memories." "What about red stones?" Chloe wanted to know. Ah, red stones were special. Those were for memories that showed how much love someone had in their heart. The biggest, brightest red stones came from times when someone did something just because they loved you so much. Connor found himself thinking before the children could answer. "Your mom used to wake up at 5 in the morning every Sunday to make homemade cinnamon rolls because she knew they were your favorite breakfast. She'd spend hours in the kitchen, and the whole house would smell like cinnamon and sugar. And she'd let us help sometimes," Oliver added excitedly. "She'd give us our own little pieces of dough to roll out, even though we made a mess." "Even though your dough usually ended up more on the counter than in the pan," Connor laughed, the first genuine laugh he'd had in months. "She'd pretend your crooked little rolls were the most beautiful things she'd ever seen." "They were beautiful to her," Evelyn observed quietly. "That's what love does. It makes everything precious." The truth of her words settled over Connor like a gentle revelation. Melissa hadn't just tolerated the twins' messiness or childish attempts to help. She genuinely treasured those moments because they came from her children. Love really did transform the ordinary into something sacred. "Mrs. Washington," Connor said, surprising himself with the question that came next, "what are some of your red stones with Jerome?" Evelyn's face lit up with a warmth that made her look years younger. "Oh my! Where do I begin?" Jerome knew I loved fresh flowers, so every Friday for 32 years, he would stop by the grocery store on his way home from work and buy me a small bouquet. Nothing fancy or expensive, just whatever caught his eye that week. Daisies, carnations, sometimes just wildflowers from the parking lot median. She paused, lost in the memory. "I probably have 1,000 Friday flowers pressed between the pages of various books around our house. Each one represents a week of his life that he chose to spend thinking about making me smile." Connor felt something shift inside his chest. That level of consistent, quiet devotion over 3 decades was staggering. Jerome hadn't made grand romantic gestures or expensive displays of affection. He'd simply shown up, week after week, year after year, with small tokens of his love. "That's the most beautiful red stone I've ever heard," Chloe said solemnly, unconsciously echoing Evelyn's words back to her. "Thank you, sweetheart. But I think I have an even bigger one." "Really?" Oliver leaned forward with curiosity. "Jerome spent every summer vacation for 20 years helping me set up my new classroom. He'd move desks, hang bulletin boards, organize supplies, paint murals on the walls. He did it all without me ever asking, because he knew how much my teaching meant to me." Connor tried to imagine that level of partnership. He and Melissa had loved each other deeply, but their relationship had been different. They'd been building careers, chasing success, planning for a future that had been cut short. They'd never had the chance to develop the kind of selfless devotion that came from decades of putting each other first. "He sounds like he was an amazing husband," Connor said sincerely. "He was. But more than that, he was my dearest friend. We talked about everything. Laughed together every single day. Even after 32 years, I still looked forward to hearing about his day when he came home from work." The wistfulness in her voice was unmistakable, but Connor noticed it wasn't bitter or desperate. It was the kind of sadness that came from having had something so wonderful that its absence left a beautiful ache. "Do you think you'll ever want to find someone else?" Chloe asked with the innocent directness that only children possess. Evelyn considered the question seriously. "I don't know, honey. Jerome and I had something very special, and I'm not sure it could be replaced. But I'm learning that maybe it doesn't need to be replaced. Maybe there are different kinds of love for different seasons of life." Her words resonated with Connor more deeply than he'd expected. Since Melissa's death, he'd assumed that part of his life was over forever. The idea of ever loving someone else had seemed not just impossible, but somehow disloyal to her memory. But listening to Evelyn, he began to wonder if he'd been thinking about it all wrong. Maybe love wasn't a finite resource that got used up when someone died. Maybe the heart could expand to hold both grief for what was lost and hope for what might still be possible. "Mrs. Washington," he said carefully, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. How do you do it? How do you carry the sadness of losing Jerome while still being able to help other people?" "When Melissa died, I felt like I barely had enough emotional energy to get through each day, let alone support my children the way they needed." Evelyn was quiet for a moment, watching Oliver and Chloe as they continued to look through her photo album. When she spoke, her voice carried the wisdom of someone who'd wrestled with profound questions and found her own answers. "The first few months after Jerome died, I couldn't do anything for anyone. I could barely take care of myself. I stopped cooking, stopped gardening, stopped calling friends. I was drowning in my own grief, and I thought that was how I'd spend the rest of my life." Connor nodded, recognizing his own experience perfectly. "But then one day, about 5 months after the funeral, I was at the grocery store and I saw a young mother struggling with 2 toddlers having meltdowns in the cereal aisle. The babies were screaming, she was crying, and everyone was staring at her like she was failing as a parent." "What did you do?" Connor asked, though he suspected he already knew. "I walked over and started making silly faces at the children while she collected herself. Within 5 minutes, they were laughing instead of crying, and she was able to finish her shopping. When she thanked me, she said something that changed everything for me." "What did she say?" "She said, 'I don't know who you are, but you just saved my whole day. I felt so alone until you appeared. And I realized that Jerome had been right all those years. The best way to heal a broken heart really is to help fix someone else's.'" Connor felt tears pricking at his eyes. "But doesn't it hurt to give so much of yourself when you're already empty?" "Oh honey, that's the miracle. I thought I was empty too, until I started giving again. Then I discovered that love doesn't diminish when you share it. It multiplies. Every child I've comforted since Jerome died has somehow added to my capacity to love, not taken away from it." The profound truth of her words hit Connor like lightning. He'd been hoarding his emotional energy, trying to conserve what little he had for just him and the twins. But maybe that's exactly why he'd been running on empty. Maybe love was like a muscle that grew stronger with use, not weaker. "Is that why you felt drawn to help us today?" he asked. Partly. But also because I saw something in your eyes that reminded me of my own reflection during those first terrible months. The look of someone who's been carrying too much alone for too long. Connor felt exposed in the most gentle way possible. This woman had seen through his facade of competence and control to the exhausted, overwhelmed man underneath. I don't know how to not carry it alone, he admitted quietly. I've been the provider, the problem solver, the one with answers my whole adult life. When Melissa got sick, I threw money at the best doctors, the most advanced treatments, the most expensive care. I thought if I just worked hard enough, controlled enough variables, I could fix it. When she died anyway, I felt like I'd failed at the most important job I'd ever had. Oh, Connor, Evelyn said, using his first name for the first time. You didn't fail. You loved her with everything you had. Sometimes love isn't enough to change the outcome, but that doesn't make it any less valuable or real. Hearing his name spoken with such compassion by this remarkable woman made Connor feel something he'd forgotten was possible. Understood. Not judged, not pitted, not fixed, just truly seen and accepted. The twins have been acting out for months, he continued, the words pouring out now that he'd found someone safe to hear them. Tantrums, nightmares, refusing to follow any rules or routines. Everyone kept telling me I needed to be firmer, more consistent, more disciplined in my approach. But watching you with them today, I realized I've been treating their grief like a behavioral problem instead of what it really is. What do you think it really is? Evelyn asked gently. Connor looked at Oliver and Chloe, who were now quietly discussing each photo in the album with the focus that children brought to things that truly interested them. It's love with nowhere to go. They miss their mother so much that the love keeps pouring out of them in all the wrong directions because they don't know where else to put it. That might be the most beautiful and accurate description of childhood grief I've ever heard, Evelyn said softly. And the most hopeful too, because if it's really love looking for a place to land, then there are ways to help it find a home. What moments in your life have taught you the most about love and loss? Sometimes our deepest wounds become the source of our greatest wisdom. Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more stories about finding hope in unexpected places. Connor felt something fundamental shifting inside him. For the first time since Melissa's death, he wasn't thinking about survival or damage control. He was thinking about healing, about growth, about the possibility that his family's broken pieces might not just be put back together, but transformed into something even more beautiful than before. And sitting across from him, sharing her wisdom and warmth with his children, was a woman who'd already shown him that such transformation was possible. The airplane began its initial descent toward Miami, but Connor found himself wishing they had hours more to talk. The captain's voice came over the intercom with the familiar cadence of approaching destination. Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our final descent into Miami International Airport. Local time is 4:47 p.m., and it's a beautiful 78-degree afternoon in South Florida. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for landing. Connor felt his stomach drop, and not from the airplane's descent. The announcement meant their time with Evelyn was coming to an end, and he wasn't ready for that reality. Over the past hour, she'd accomplished what months of therapy and parenting books hadn't. She'd helped his children remember their mother with joy instead of just pain, and she'd helped him see grief as a form of love rather than a problem to solve. I don't want to get off the airplane, Chloe said softly, echoing his own thoughts. Can Mrs. Washington come home with us? The innocent request hit Connor with unexpected force. How could he explain to his 4-year-old daughter that sometimes the people who help you most are the ones you meet briefly and then lose forever? Oh, sweetheart, Evelyn said gently. I wish I could, but I'm visiting my sister in Miami. Remember, I told you about her earlier. How long are you visiting? Oliver asked hopefully. Just for 2 weeks. Then I fly back to Denver. Connor's mind raced. 2 weeks. That wasn't very long, but maybe it was long enough to... What exactly? What was he thinking? That he could somehow extend this magical afternoon into something more permanent? That this remarkable woman who just met his children 3 hours ago might want to become part of their complicated, grief-stricken lives? The airplane hit a patch of turbulence during its descent, nothing like the severe weather they'd experienced earlier, but enough to cause a brief jolt. Chloe immediately reached for Evelyn's hand, a gesture that would have been unthinkable at the beginning of the flight. "It's okay, beautiful girl. We're almost on the ground now," Evelyn soothed, but Connor noticed something in her voice that hadn't been there before. A tightness, as if she too was struggling with the approaching goodbye. "Mrs. Washington," Connor said carefully, "I know this might be presumptuous, but would you like to have dinner with us tonight? I mean, if you're not too busy with your sister. I'd love to properly thank you for everything you've done today." The invitation hung in the air between them. Connor immediately second-guessed himself. Why would she want to spend her vacation time with a widowed stranger and his emotionally complicated children? She'd already given them far more than anyone could reasonably expect. Before Evelyn could respond, Patricia Mills's voice cut through their conversation like a knife. "Well, isn't this touching?" she said loudly enough for half the first-class cabin to hear. "I suppose some people just can't resist a good sob story, especially when there's money involved." The vicious comment landed like a physical blow. Connor felt his face burn with humiliation and rage, but it was the look of hurt that flashed across Evelyn's face that made his blood boil. "Excuse me," he said, turning to face Patricia directly. "Oh, please, don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about," Patricia continued, her voice dripping with disdain. "Rich widower, tragic children, vulnerable woman looking for her next meal ticket. It's the oldest story in the book." The accusation was so cruel and so far from the truth that Connor felt momentarily speechless. Behind Patricia, several other passengers looked uncomfortable with her comments, but no one spoke up to challenge her. "That is completely out of line," Dr. Reed said firmly, but Patricia ignored him. "Is it?" This woman saw an opportunity and seized it. "I guarantee you she's already calculating how much sympathy she can milk from this situation." Evelyn's face had gone pale, and Connor could see her withdrawing into herself. The warm, confident woman who'd spent the afternoon healing his family was disappearing before his eyes, replaced by someone who looked small and hurt. "You don't know what you're talking about," Connor said, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't I? I've seen this exact scenario play out a dozen times in my social circles. Struggling woman meets wealthy man in crisis, plays the savior, and suddenly she's got herself a nice, comfortable life." The racist and classist undertones in Patricia's words were unmistakable now. She wasn't just attacking Evelyn's motives. She was reducing her to a stereotype that had nothing to do with the remarkable person Connor had come to know. "That's enough," he said, standing up despite the seatbelt sign. "You need to stop talking right now." But Patricia was just getting started. "I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking. This whole performance was a little too convenient, don't you think? The perfect stranger with the perfect solution appears just when you're at your most vulnerable." Evelyn finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "Mr. Hayes, it's all right. I understand how this must look to some people." "No, it's not all right," Connor said fiercely. "And it doesn't look like anything except what it was, a kind person helping children in distress." "A kind person," Patricia laughed harshly, "or a smart opportunist. I noticed she was very quick to accept your dinner invitation." The comment hit its target. Connor saw Evelyn flinch, and something broke inside him. This woman had given his family a gift beyond measure, and now she was being attacked for her generosity by someone who'd shown nothing but cruelty all afternoon. "Actually, I haven't accepted anything," Evelyn said quietly, and Connor's heart sank. "And perhaps Mrs. Mills is right. Perhaps it would be better if we kept this as just a nice memory from a difficult flight. Mrs. Washington, please don't let her poison what we've shared today," Connor pleaded. But Evelyn was already pulling back emotionally. Connor could see it happening, the walls going up to protect herself from further attack. Robert Kane, who'd been mostly quiet since his earlier complaints, suddenly spoke up. "You know what? I owe everyone an apology. At the beginning of this flight, I was one of the people complaining about these kids. But watching how Mrs. Washington handled the situation, and seeing how much she genuinely cared about helping them. Patricia, you're way out of line here." Several other passengers murmured their agreement, but the damage was already done. Evelyn had withdrawn completely, her face a mask of polite distance. "Thank you, Mr. Kane," she said formally, "but really, it's fine. I was just doing what any teacher would do." The word teacher carried a subtle emphasis that Connor caught immediately. She was reminding everyone, including herself, of her professional identity rather than the personal connection they'd been building. Patricia wasn't finished. Oh, I'm sure. Just a selfless public servant looking out for the welfare of children. How noble. I'm sure the fact that their father is worth billions had nothing to do with your sudden interest. The mention of Connor's wealth hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several passengers' expressions changed subtly, and Connor realized that Patricia had just poisoned the well for everyone who'd been listening to their conversation. That's irrelevant, Dr. Reed said firmly. Mrs. Washington helped those children before she knew anything about their father's financial situation. Did she, though? Patricia asked with mock innocence. First-class passengers, designer clothes, obvious wealth. I think she sized up the situation pretty quickly. Evelyn stood up abruptly, her movements sharp with hurt and anger. You know what? You're absolutely right. I should have minded my own business. I should have stayed in my assigned seat and let those children suffer through their panic attacks and grief without interference. Her voice carried a bitter edge that Connor had never heard before. Clearly, my 30 years of experience working with traumatized children means nothing if I'm not the right color or class to be trusted with helping them. The racial implication was finally out in the open, and several passengers gasped. Patricia's face flushed, but she doubled down instead of backing down. I never said anything about race. You didn't have to, Evelyn replied quietly. Every assumption you've made about my motives, every suspicion about my character, every suggestion that I'm somehow calculating or opportunistic. We both know where that comes from. Connor felt sick to his stomach. The beautiful afternoon they'd shared, the healing his children had experienced, the connection he'd felt growing between himself and this remarkable woman, all of it was being twisted into something ugly by Patricia's prejudice and cruelty. Mrs. Washington, please don't let her do this, he said desperately. Don't let her take away what we've built today. But Evelyn was already gathering her purse and the children's book. There's nothing to take away, Mr. Hayes. I helped your children during a difficult moment on an airplane. That's all this was. The formal distance in her voice when she used his last name felt like a door slamming shut. Connor watched helplessly as she rebuilt every emotional wall they'd spent hours dismantling. Can I at least get your phone number? He asked quietly. So the children can thank you properly when they've had time to process everything? Evelyn hesitated for just a moment, and Connor thought he saw a flicker of the warmth they'd shared. But then Patricia's voice cut through the moment again. Oh, how romantic. I'm sure she'll be very eager to stay in touch. The sarcasm was the final straw. Evelyn's face went completely blank, the protective mask that Connor recognized from her first interactions with the hostile passengers. That won't be necessary, she said politely. It was lovely meeting your family, Mr. Hayes. I hope the children continue to heal. The airplane touched down with a gentle bump, and passengers around them began the familiar ritual of gathering belongings and preparing to disembark. But Connor felt like his world was crashing down around him. Oliver and Chloe, who'd been quietly listening to the adult conversation without fully understanding its implications, seemed to sense that something precious was being lost. Mrs. Washington, are you mad at us? Chloe asked with 4-year-old directness. Evelyn's composure cracked just slightly. Oh no, sweetheart. I could never be mad at you. You and your brother are absolutely wonderful children. Then why can't you have dinner with us? Oliver wanted to know. Evelyn looked at Connor over the children's heads, and for just a moment, he saw all the hurt and disappointment she was trying to hide. She'd opened her heart to his family, shared her own grief and wisdom, and been repaid with suspicion and accusations. Sometimes grown-ups have to make difficult decisions, even when they don't want to, she said softly to the twins. But I want you both to remember something very important. Your mama's garden is real, and it's beautiful, and every time you remember her with love instead of sadness, new flowers bloom there. She turned to Connor one last time. Take care of them. They're going to be just fine. As the airplane taxied toward the gate, Connor felt the weight of a missed opportunity settling on his chest like a stone. This woman had saved his children's afternoon and possibly their emotional future, and he was about to let her walk out of their lives forever because of one passenger's toxic prejudice. The worst part was that Evelyn was protecting herself in the only way she knew how, by retreating behind professional boundaries and emotional walls. She'd been hurt too many times by assumptions and accusations to risk her heart with his family, no matter how genuine their connection had been. The seatbelt sign chimed off, and passengers began standing to collect their luggage. Connor watched Evelyn gather her things with the efficient movements of someone who just wanted to escape. In a few minutes, she would walk off this airplane and out of their lives forever. Unless he found the courage to fight for what they'd begun to build together. Connor stood at the gate watching Evelyn disappear into the crowd of deplaning passengers, his heart hammering against his ribs. Oliver and Chloe clung to his hands, both children sensing that something important was slipping away from them. "Daddy, why did Mrs. Washington leave without saying goodbye?" Chloe's voice was small and confused. "She did say goodbye, Princess. She told you to remember about Mommy's garden, remember? But she looked sad when she said it. Did we do something wrong?" The question pierced Connor's heart. His children had experienced the first genuine healing they'd had since Melissa's death, and now they were watching it disappear because of someone else's cruelty. "No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes grown-ups make things complicated when they should be simple." Connor pulled out his phone and stared at the blank screen, knowing he should call his driver to arrange pickup, contact his Miami hotel, check his messages. But all he could think about was Evelyn Washington walking through this airport alone, carrying her own grief and now the added pain of being misjudged for trying to help his family. "Sir, are you all right?" Connor looked up to see Dr. Anthony Reed standing beside their gate area, concern written across his face. "Not really," Connor admitted honestly. "That woman just saved my children's emotional lives, and I let her walk away because I was too shocked to respond properly to those horrible accusations." Dr. Reed nodded grimly. Patricia Mills was completely out of line. Her comments were racist, classist, and just plain cruel. Several of us were planning to report her behavior to the airline. "It doesn't matter now. The damage is done." Mrs. Washington protected herself the only way she knew how, by cutting off contact before she could be hurt any worse. "Is that what you're going to let happen?" Dr. Reed asked pointedly. "Because from what I observed during that flight, what passed between your family and that remarkable woman wasn't something that happens every day." Connor looked down at his twins, who were uncharacteristically quiet as they processed the afternoon's emotional roller coaster. "Daddy," Oliver said thoughtfully, "Mrs. Washington told us that when you love someone, you have to be brave enough to tend the garden, even when it's hard." Out of the mouths of babes. Connor's 4-year-old son had just reminded him of the most important lesson from their airplane conversation. Love required courage. "You're right, buddy. Love does require bravery." Connor made a decision that surprised even himself. "Dr. Reed, would you mind watching Oliver and Chloe for just a few minutes? I need to find Mrs. Washington before she leaves the airport." "Of course. But you'd better hurry. She's probably already collecting her luggage." Connor knelt down to his children's level. "I'm going to try to find Mrs. Washington and apologize for how some people treated her today. I want her to know that we don't agree with those mean things that lady said. Can you tell her we want to be friends with her?" Chloe asked hopefully. "I'll tell her exactly that." Connor took off through the airport, his heart racing as he navigated the crowded terminals. Miami International was massive, and he had no idea which baggage claim Evelyn would be using or how much of a head start she had on him. He found himself running past families reuniting, business travelers checking phones, tourists beginning their vacations, all the normal airport scenes that felt surreal against the backdrop of his emotional urgency. When was the last time he'd run after someone because he couldn't bear to let them go? When was the last time his heart had been invested in anything beyond his children's immediate survival? Baggage claim B. Nothing. He tried claim A, scanning every face in the crowd. His phone buzzed with messages from his assistant, his driver, his Miami hotel, but he ignored them all. Finally, at baggage claim C, he spotted her. Evelyn stood beside the carousel, her emerald cardigan a splash of color in the sea of travelers. She'd pulled her gray hair back more severely than before, and her posture was rigid with the kind of dignity that comes from years of maintaining composure in the face of unfair treatment. Connor approached slowly, suddenly uncertain about what he wanted to say. How do you apologize for someone else's racism? How do you convince someone to trust you when they've just been given every reason not to? Mrs. Washington? She turned, and Connor saw a flash of surprise followed quickly by wariness. Mr. Hayes, I thought you'd be collecting your luggage by now. I couldn't let you leave without apologizing for what happened on that plane. Patricia Mills was completely wrong, and her comments were inexcusable. You don't need to apologize for someone else's behavior, Evelyn replied politely, but Connor could hear the walls in her voice. Yes, I do. Because I sat there and let her attack you instead of defending you immediately and decisively. You deserved better from me. Evelyn's suitcase appeared on the carousel, and she reached for it. Connor stepped forward to help, but she shook her head. I can manage, thank you. The formal distance in her tone was like a knife to Connor's chest. This was the same woman who'd spent hours sharing intimate stories about grief and love, who'd opened her heart to his children, who'd shown him a different way to think about healing. Now she was treating him like a polite stranger. Mrs. Washington, please. Can we start over? Can I at least try to explain? There's nothing to explain, Mr. Hayes. I understand exactly what happened. It's not the first time I've been judged for trying to help someone, and it won't be the last. The resignation in her voice broke Connor's heart. How many times had this remarkable woman faced suspicion and prejudice for the crime of caring about others? The children are asking about you, he said, changing tactics. They want to know if they did something wrong, why you seemed sad when you said goodbye. For the first time since he'd found her, Evelyn's composure cracked slightly. Those beautiful babies didn't do anything wrong. I hope you told them that. I did. But they're confused about why someone who helped them so much suddenly had to disappear from their lives. Honestly, so am I. Evelyn pulled her suitcase upright and looked directly at him. Mr. Hayes, I need you to understand something. What happened on that airplane was beautiful. Watching your children remember their mother with joy instead of pain, seeing them find peace in the middle of their grief, sharing stories about the people we've loved and lost. It was healing for all of us. Then why are you walking away from it? Because I've learned that beautiful moments can become ugly very quickly when people make assumptions about my motives. I've had parents question my qualifications because of my race, administrators doubt my methods because of my background, colleagues assume I'm less capable because of where I came from. I thought I was done with all of that when I retired, but today reminded me that it follows me everywhere. Connor felt the full weight of her pain and his own privilege in a way he'd never experienced before. As a wealthy white man, he'd never had to worry about his motives being questioned based on his appearance, never had to prove his worthiness to help others, never had to choose between offering kindness and protecting himself from attack. I can't pretend to understand what that's like, he said quietly. But I can tell you what I saw today. I saw a woman with extraordinary wisdom and compassion who reached my children when no one else could. I saw someone who understood grief in a way that helped us all begin to heal. And I saw a person I would be honored to call a friend, regardless of what anyone else thinks. Evelyn studied his face, searching for something Connor wasn't sure he could provide. Proof that he was different from all the other people who'd disappointed her. Your friend Patricia made it very clear what she thinks about my friendship with your family. Patricia Mills is not my friend. I met her for the first time on that airplane, and after what she said to you, I hope I never see her again. She doesn't speak for me or represent my values in any way. But she's not wrong about how this looks, is she? Wealthy widower meets older black woman during family crisis. Forms instant connection. People are going to make assumptions. Let them, Connor said with surprising vehemence. Let them make all the assumptions they want. I know who you are, and my children know who you are. That's all that matters. Evelyn shook her head sadly. You say that now, but you don't understand the scrutiny that would come with maintaining a friendship with me. Your social circle, your business associates, your children's school communities. They'll all have opinions about the kind of woman you're choosing to spend time with. Then they'll learn that I choose my friends based on their character, not their demographics. And when they start whispering that I'm after your money, when they suggest I'm manipulating your children's grief for my own gain, when they question every kindness I show your family, Connor felt anger rising in his chest, not at Evelyn but at the world that had taught her to expect such treatment. Then I'll correct them. Loudly and publicly if necessary. Mrs. Washington, I've spent the last 8 months failing to help my children process their grief. In 3 hours, you accomplished what I couldn't do in 8 months. You didn't do that for money or social status or any other agenda. You did it because you have a gift for healing broken hearts, and you saw children who needed that gift. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, but her posture remained guarded. You don't know me well enough to make those judgments. Don't I? I know you taught kindergarten for 30 years in an inner-city school. I know you retired early because you were drowning in grief over your husband's death, but you still couldn't walk past children in crisis without helping. I know you carry a worn children's book in your purse because somewhere, someone might need to hear about kindness and memory gardens. I know you understand love and loss in ways that most people never will. And I know my children smiled for the first time in months because you saw their pain and chose to do something about it. A tear slipped down Evelyn's cheek, but she quickly wiped it away. Those are all just facts about my history. They don't tell you who I really am. Then tell me, Connor said simply. Have dinner with us tonight. Not because I'm wealthy or you're lonely or any of the horrible things Patricia suggested. Have dinner with us because 4 hours ago, we were strangers who helped each other through a difficult afternoon, and maybe we could help each other through more than just one afternoon. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, internal conflict playing across her features. Connor could see her weighing her fears against her hopes, her need for self-protection against her natural inclination toward connection. What about your children? She asked finally. Isn't it confusing for them to have new people coming and going from their lives when they're already dealing with so much loss? They're not asking for new people to come and go, Connor replied gently. They're asking for you to stay. There's a difference. And what are you asking for? The question hung between them, loaded with implications and possibilities that Connor was only beginning to understand himself. I'm asking for a chance to get to know the woman who saved my family today. I'm asking for the opportunity to show you that not everyone will judge you for your kindness. And I'm asking for permission to tend a garden that I think we might be able to grow together. Evelyn closed her eyes, and Connor held his breath waiting for her answer. When she opened them again, he saw a flicker of the warmth that had characterized their airplane conversation. One dinner, she said quietly. With your children present, somewhere public, with no expectations beyond getting to know each other better. Connor felt his heart soar. One dinner. With Oliver and Chloe, somewhere public, no expectations. And if Patricia Mills or anyone like her makes this difficult, then we'll face it together. You won't have to defend yourself alone anymore. For the first time since the airplane, Evelyn smiled. It was tentative and guarded, but it was genuine. All right, Connor Hayes. One dinner. But I'm choosing the restaurant, and we're going Dutch. Connor laughed, feeling lighter than he had in months. Deal. Though I have to warn you, Oliver and Chloe are probably going to want to hear more stories about memory gardens. I think I can handle that, Evelyn said, and Connor heard an echo of the woman who'd transformed his children's afternoon. As they walked back toward the gate to collect Oliver and Chloe, Connor realized he'd just made the most important choice of his life since Melissa's death. He'd chosen to fight for connection instead of accepting isolation, to trust in possibility instead of surrendering to fear. And for the first time in 8 months, he was looking forward to tomorrow. And then the little rabbit realized that the garden wasn't just growing in the ground, Evelyn said, her voice carrying the practiced rhythm of a master storyteller. It was growing in her heart too. Every time she shared a memory bloom with someone else, the garden got bigger and more beautiful. Oliver and Chloe sat transfixed across the restaurant table, their earlier airplane trauma transformed into peaceful attention. The famous Miami seafood restaurant bustled around them with the dinner crowd, but their corner booth felt like an intimate sanctuary. Connor watched his children's faces glow in the soft candlelight, marveling at the transformation. Just 6 hours ago, they'd been screaming and hyperventilating on an airplane. Now they were engaged, curious, and genuinely happy for the first time since their mother's death. So the garden never goes away? Chloe asked, twirling spaghetti around her fork with 4-year-old determination. Never, Evelyn confirmed warmly. It might look different in different seasons. Sometimes the flowers bloom bright and colorful, sometimes they rest quietly under snow. But the roots stay strong forever, because love like that doesn't die. It just changes form. Connor felt his throat tighten with emotion. Over the past 3 hours, he'd watched Evelyn seamlessly weave grief counseling into dinner conversation, helping his children process their loss while making them feel safe and understood. Her gift for reaching traumatized children wasn't just professional skill. It was pure intuition combined with a heart that had been broken and healed enough times to recognize the process in others. "Mrs. Washington," Oliver said thoughtfully, "do you think Daddy's heart has a garden too?" The innocent question caught Connor off guard. He looked up to find Evelyn studying his face with gentle curiosity. "What do you think?" she asked Oliver instead of answering directly. "I think his garden got really sad when Mommy died. Like maybe all the flowers went to sleep and forgot how to wake up." The 4-year-old's insight was so accurate that Connor felt tears prick his eyes. Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. "That's a very wise observation," Evelyn said softly. "Sometimes when we lose someone very important, our gardens do go dormant for a while. The flowers don't disappear, but they need time and tending before they can bloom again." "How do you wake up the flowers?" Chloe wanted to know. Evelyn glanced at Connor, seeking permission before delving into more therapeutic territory. He nodded, trusting her instincts completely. "Well, sometimes the flowers wake up when we find other people who understand gardens. People who can help us remember that even when some flowers sleep, new ones can still grow." "Is that what you're doing for Daddy?" Oliver asked with startling directness. Connor held his breath, wondering how Evelyn would navigate such a loaded question from a child who'd already lost one important woman in his life. "I think," she said carefully, "that your daddy has been taking such good care of his garden all by himself that he's forgotten he doesn't have to do it alone. Sometimes gardens grow better when people tend them together." The metaphor was perfect. Not threatening to the children's sense of security, not replacing their mother's memory, but suggesting that love could expand rather than be diminished by new connections. "Are you going to help tend our garden?" Chloe asked hopefully. Evelyn looked at Connor across the table, and something passed between them that felt like a promise. "If your daddy would like that, and if you would like that, then yes. I would be honored to help tend your beautiful garden." Connor felt his world shift on its axis. This remarkable woman was offering not just friendship but partnership in the most important work of his life, helping his children heal and grow. "What about your own garden?" he asked quietly. "The one you shared with Jerome?" "I'm learning that gardens can have more than one gardener," she replied, her eyes never leaving his. "Jerome's flowers will always bloom there, but maybe there's room for new plantings too. Different flowers for a different season, but still part of the same beautiful space." The restaurant noise faded into background as Connor processed the magnitude of what she was offering. Not just companionship, not just help with his children, but the possibility of real partnership with someone who understood both love and loss at the deepest level. "Mrs. Washington," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I think that sounds like the most beautiful garden imaginable." Oliver and Chloe looked back and forth between the adults, sensing that something important was happening even if they couldn't articulate exactly what. "Does this mean we can see you again after tonight?" Chloe asked hopefully. "Well," Evelyn said with a smile that transformed her entire face, "I'm going to be in Miami for 2 weeks visiting my sister. Maybe we could explore the city together sometimes. Would you like that?" Both children erupted in excitement, their joy so infectious that other diners turned to smile at their enthusiasm. "And after the 2 weeks?" Connor asked quietly. "After the 2 weeks, we'll see what grows," Evelyn replied. "But Connor, I need you to understand something. This won't be easy. Patricia Mills wasn't the first person to make assumptions about my motives, and she won't be the last. If we're going to tend this garden together, you need to be prepared for people who won't understand or approve." "Let me worry about other people," Connor said firmly. "You've already shown me more about healing and love in one afternoon than I learned in 8 months of trying to figure everything out alone. Whatever challenges come, we'll face them together." The waiter appeared to clear their plates, and Connor realized they'd been talking for over 2 hours. The restaurant had filled and emptied around them while they'd been lost in conversation about gardens and grief and the possibility of new beginnings. "Daddy," Oliver said as they prepared to leave, "I want to tell you something about Mommy's garden." "What's that, buddy?" "I think she would really like Mrs. Washington. I think she would want her to help take care of her flowers." The statement was so profound, coming from a 4-year-old, that Connor felt his breath catch. Oliver wasn't seeing Evelyn as a replacement for his mother or a threat to her memory. He was seeing her as someone who would honor and tend what Melissa had planted. "You know what, Oliver? I think you're absolutely right." As they walked through the warm Miami evening toward Connor's rental car, Chloe slipped her small hand into Evelyn's. It was such a natural gesture that it seemed to surprise them both. "Mrs. Washington, will you tell us more stories about gardens tomorrow?" "I'd love to, sweetheart." Connor watched his daughter walk hand in hand with this remarkable woman and felt something he hadn't experienced since before Melissa's diagnosis: hope for the future. At Evelyn's hotel, they lingered in the lobby longer than necessary, none of them quite ready for the evening to end. "Thank you," Connor said as Oliver and Chloe examined tropical fish in a large aquarium nearby. "For everything. For helping them on the plane, for giving me a second chance after that horrible scene, for this dinner, for showing us a different way to think about grief and healing." "Thank you for chasing me through the airport," Evelyn replied with a soft laugh. "It's been a long time since anyone fought for me like that. It's been a long time since I had anything worth fighting for besides basic survival." They looked at each other across the hotel lobby, two people who'd found unexpected connection in the midst of shared loss. "Tomorrow?" Connor asked. "Tomorrow," Evelyn confirmed. "The Miami Seaquarium? I think the children would love seeing the dolphins." "It's a date. I mean, it's a plan. Connor stumbled over his words, suddenly feeling like a teenager. "It's a date," Evelyn said with a smile that made his heart race. "The first of many, I hope." 6 months later, Connor stood in his Denver backyard watching Evelyn teach Oliver and Chloe how to plant actual memory flowers in the garden she'd helped them design. Melissa's favorite roses bloomed along one border, while new plantings of Jerome's beloved tomatoes grew in raised beds nearby. The children's laughter filled the air as they got more soil on themselves than in the planting holes. Evelyn's patience with their enthusiasm reminded Connor daily why she'd been such an extraordinary teacher. "Daddy, look!" Chloe called out. "Mrs. Evelyn says these purple flowers will bloom every spring to remember Mommy's birthday. And these yellow ones will bloom in summer when Uncle Jerome's birthday was," Oliver added, his small hands covered in dirt and his face glowing with happiness. Connor smiled, thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The plane ride that had started as a disaster and ended as the beginning of everything beautiful in their new life. Evelyn looked up from the flower bed, her silver hair catching the afternoon sunlight, her face radiant with the kind of joy that comes from nurturing new growth. "How's our garden looking?" she asked, and Connor's heart swelled at the word "our." "It's perfect," he said, meaning so much more than just the flowers. That evening, as they tucked Oliver and Chloe into bed, the children insisted on their new bedtime ritual. "Tell us about the gardens," Chloe requested sleepily. "Well," Evelyn began, settling into the chair beside their beds, "once upon a time, there were 2 gardens that grew side by side. One had been tended by a beautiful mama who had to go on a long journey, and one had been cared for by a loving papa who missed his dear friend. The gardens were sad and lonely for a while, until they realized that gardens grow best when they share sunshine and rain." Connor listened from the doorway, marveling at how Evelyn had transformed their story of loss into a tale of love and hope. "And now," Oliver mumbled, already half asleep, "now the gardens bloom together, more beautiful than either could have been alone. And every flower that grows there carries the love of everyone who tends them, past and present, forever and always." As Evelyn turned off the bedroom light and joined Connor in the hallway, he pulled her into his arms. "I love you," he whispered against her hair, words that had taken months to find the courage to say but now felt as natural as breathing. "I love you too," she replied, and Connor felt the last broken pieces of his heart click into place. Outside their bedroom window, the memory garden bloomed in the moonlight, Melissa's roses intertwined with Jerome's climbing beans, Oliver's sunflowers reaching toward tomorrow beside Chloe's butterfly wildflowers, and in the center, a small bench where Connor and Evelyn sat together each evening, tending the beautiful space they'd created from the seeds of shared sorrow and unexpected love. The garden that had begun with a children's story on a turbulent airplane had grown into the foundation of a new family, rooted in loss but reaching always toward light. And every bloom whispered the same eternal truth. Love never truly dies. It just finds new ways to grow. 1 year later, Connor adjusted his tie nervously as he stood outside the familiar brick building where Evelyn had spent 30 years shaping young lives. Today marked the dedication of the new Evelyn Washington Memorial Garden and Learning Center, funded by his foundation but designed entirely according to her vision. "Daddy, there's Mrs. Patricia," Chloe called out, pointing across the school courtyard. Connor turned to see Dr. Anthony Reed approaching with his own family, the same man who defended Evelyn during that turbulent flight. They'd stayed in touch over the months, becoming genuine friends bonded by their shared witness to an extraordinary day. "Connor, great to see you," Dr. Reed extended his hand warmly. "I can't believe it's been a year since that crazy flight." "Best airplane disaster of my life," Connor laughed, watching Oliver and Chloe race toward the playground where Evelyn was already surrounded by excited children. "Whatever happened to that awful woman, Patricia Mills?" Connor's expression grew serious. "Actually, that's an interesting story. 3 months after our flight, she reached out through my company. Apparently, watching Evelyn with my children, and seeing how wrong she'd been, started her thinking about her own prejudices." Dr. Reed raised his eyebrows in surprise. "She's been volunteering at an inner-city school in her hometown, trying to make amends in her own way. She wrote Evelyn a letter of apology that was surprisingly heartfelt. Even donated to this Memorial Garden project. People can change, I suppose. Evelyn always said that was the point of teaching. Everyone can learn, even adults who think they already know everything." They walked toward the garden where a small crowd was gathering for the dedication ceremony. Connor spotted his sister-in-law, who'd become one of Evelyn's closest friends during those 2 weeks in Miami, and several of his business associates who'd initially raised eyebrows about his relationship but had been completely won over by Evelyn's grace and wisdom. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Connor's social circle had indeed whispered at first, exactly as Evelyn had predicted. But seeing her interact with their children, witnessing her intelligence and kindness firsthand, and watching how she'd helped Connor become a better father had silenced most critics. Those who remained judgmental had simply found themselves no longer welcome in Connor's life. "Mr. Hayes," a familiar voice called out. Connor turned to see Jennifer Torres, the flight attendant from Flight 847, approaching with a broad smile. She'd received a commendation from the airline for her compassionate handling of the crisis, and they'd kept in touch through holiday cards and occasional emails. "Jennifer, you made it. Wouldn't miss it. How's our favorite family doing?" "See for yourself," Connor gestured toward the garden where Oliver and Chloe were helping Evelyn demonstrate proper planting techniques to a group of kindergartners. The children had continued their therapy with Dr. Palmer, but the real healing had come through their daily life with Evelyn. She'd never tried to replace their mother's memory, but had instead helped them understand that love could expand infinitely without diminishing what came before. They still missed Melissa, still had difficult days, but they also had joy, security, and the deep knowledge that they were surrounded by people who would never leave them. "Ladies and gentlemen," the school principal called for attention, "we're ready to begin our dedication ceremony." Connor found Evelyn in the crowd, radiant in a purple dress that complemented her silver hair beautifully. The past year had transformed her as much as it had him. She'd returned to substitute teaching part-time, started a grief counseling program for children, and became the unofficial mother to dozens of students who needed extra attention. But more than that, she'd bloomed back into herself. The withdrawn, grieving widow from that airplane had rediscovered her purpose and joy through helping others and being loved in return. "Before we dedicate this beautiful space," the principal continued, "I'd like Mrs. Washington to share a few words about what this garden represents." Evelyn stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly across the courtyard as she addressed the gathered crowd of teachers, parents, and children. "This garden grows from a simple truth that I learned on an airplane one difficult afternoon," she began, catching Connor's eye with a smile. "When we're hurting, our first instinct is often to close our hearts, to protect ourselves from further pain. But what I've discovered is that hearts, like gardens, are meant to be shared. They grow stronger and more beautiful when tended by many hands. She gestured toward the memorial plantings, where flowers honoring Jerome bloomed alongside roses planted in Melissa's memory, surrounded by new growth representing hope for the future. This garden will teach our children that love doesn't end when someone dies. It transforms. It finds new soil, new gardeners, new ways to bloom. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, our greatest losses become the foundation for our most unexpected joys. As applause filled the courtyard, Connor felt Oliver slip his small hand into his right hand while Chloe took his left. Evelyn caught his eye across the crowd, and in her smile he saw everything. Gratitude for the journey that had brought them together, love for the family they'd created, and hope for all the gardens they had yet to plant. That evening, as they sat on their bench in their backyard memory garden, watching fireflies dance among the evening blossoms, Evelyn turned to Connor with a question that had been growing in her heart for months. "Connor, there's something I need to tell you." "What's that, love?" "I've been thinking about Jerome a lot lately. About what he would say about us, about this life we've built." Connor felt a familiar flutter of concern. Even after a year together, he sometimes worried that Evelyn might feel guilty about finding happiness again. "And?" Evelyn smiled, reaching into her pocket to pull out an old letter, yellowed with age. "I found this in one of his books last week. He wrote it to me 3 years ago, when his heart problems first started, but I never knew it existed until now." She unfolded the paper carefully and began to read aloud. "My dearest Evelyn, if you're reading this, then my heart has finally given out and I've had to leave you sooner than we planned. I know you're going to want to close yourself off from the world, to tend only the memories we made together. But sweetheart, that's not what I want for you. Your heart is too big, your capacity for love too enormous, to be locked away with my memory. Promise me that when you're ready, you'll let someone else help you tend our garden. It won't diminish what we had. It will honor it by letting love grow in new directions." Connor felt his own eyes fill with tears as Evelyn's voice caught with emotion. "Find someone who sees your beautiful heart, someone who will cherish not just you but also the love we shared. And know that wherever I am, I'm cheering you on, grateful that you found your way back to joy. It's signed, Forever your devoted gardener, Jerome." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, surrounded by the evening symphony of their thriving garden. "What do you think that means for us?" Connor asked quietly. "I think it means Jerome and Melissa are both smiling down at this beautiful mess we've made of trying to heal," Evelyn laughed through her tears. "And I think it means we have their blessing to keep growing this garden for as long as we both shall live." Connor pulled her closer on the bench, marveling at how perfectly she fit against his side, how natural it felt to share silence and starlight with this remarkable woman who'd transformed his family's entire world. "Mrs. Washington," he said softly, using the formal address that had started their journey. "Yes, Mr. Hayes? I think our garden is going to be absolutely magnificent." "I think you're right," she whispered back, and in the moonlight, surrounded by the flowers they'd planted with their children, Connor Hayes and Evelyn Washington continued tending the most beautiful love story that had ever grown from the soil of shared sorrow. Above them, the stars seemed to twinkle with approval, and if you listened very carefully to the evening breeze, you might have heard the gentle voices of those who'd gone before, whispering their joy at seeing love bloom eternal in the hearts they'd left behind. And sometimes very ending is also a beginning. Every loss can become the foundation for unexpected love, and every garden grows more beautiful when tended by caring hands. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, wait until you see what's coming next. It's even more powerful and inspiring than you can imagine. So don't go anywhere. Click on that video showing on your screen right now to dive into another amazing story that will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you won't regret it.